Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is the Science Dispatch podcast. I'm your host, Cameron English, joined as always by Dr. Chuck Dinerstein, the Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. Chuck, what's going on? How are you?
I'm good. And yourself?
I'm living life, sitting here next to my young daughter. Just had a bottle, so we're all in a good mood. If she's in a good mood, I'm in a good mood.
There's nothing better than having a quick bottle and maybe followed by a quick nap.
Or a long nap. We like long naps, too.
Well, I understand. Yes.
All right. Well, we're doing something a little different today. We have a special guest, although I don't know if I should call you special guest because you join us pretty frequently. Of course, I'm talking about Dr. Barbara Billauer, who is our resident legal scholar here at ACSH. Frequent contributor. She writes about bioethics and all sorts of edgy, difficult legal questions related to scientific topics. Lots of insight to be gained from her writing. So Barbara, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you for having me.
Hey, it's our pleasure. So we've got I don't know what to call this story. It's just like everything about this strikes me as wrong. Not your story, of course, but the issue you're talking about. So this is called Volunteers Infected with COVID Virus. An unethical human medical experiment goes unnoticed. So let me just read the intro here, and then you can give us sort of a synopsis, and then we've got some questions that we're going to go over with you. So you and our colleague, Dr. Henry Miller, who is also at ACSH, you write, volunteers were infected with the COVID virus in order to ascertain whether there were cognitive effects of infection. It represented the failure of safeguards against unethical experiments. Okay, so before we get into our questions here, just give us a brief overview of the study, what they did, what they were trying to find, and then we'll go from there.
Well, the proposal that described the study was couched as an attempt to understand why some people who were exposed to COVID got it and other people didn't. So it was couched as measuring an immune response. And in the protocol of the study, it described all of the tests that they were going to do and measure the immune markers. And in addition, there's a little paragraph that they're going to measure cognitive markers. And it's called a challenge study because they took uninfected people who were healthy, and they gave them COVID. Before they gave them the COVID, they took baseline measurements so they could ascertain whether there was a change before or after they injected the virus. There were actually two reports or two separate research projects that were performed as a result of this protocol. One pertained to the changes in the immune system, and one pertained to cognitive abilities. Interestingly, regarding the changes in the immune system, there was an article in The Conversation by the researchers touting the wonders and how terrific the study was, which that study in and itself was problematic. But then separately, by different, or at least partially different researchers, was the cognitive study.
Okay, so let's jump to the real meat of the matter, at least for me, because I think that it's not uncommon to see secondary studies talking about secondary outcomes. And the cognitive component was obviously a secondary outcome. And to be honest, I think that there are other examples of these human challenge studies. And so let's start with that maybe as a question, because people that are involved in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 drug trials are also being exposed to a novel situation. And so how would you think that this differs from a phase 1, phase 2 drug study? And well, let's start there. Let's just start with that. How does this study differ that makes you more concerned?
In a general phase 1, phase 2 study, which is not a challenge, you have people who are very sick, and generally speaking, conventional therapy has not worked. And you find a very interesting phenomenon in cancer patients. They want to get on the protocol. Oh, we got on the protocol. We can't wait. as if somehow this protocol, this new study, is going to give them some magic elixir. This is what's found in the common population, even though within the protocol, 50% are going to get nothing, or going to get a placebo, or going to get current treatment that's not working. Yet within and that's because these people that are signing on to the study are people who are sick and are hoping for some resolution which is not conventionally available, or even if it is conventionally available, they figure, well, there's a 50% chance I might make a difference, especially if it's a fatal disease like cancer, or potentially fatal disease. And so they're motivated both from intense self-interest, maybe they'll get cured, and maybe at the very least they will help other people. And there's no possible other way to obtain these results. Underline that. Okay. There's no other way to get these results.
Now let me be devil's advocate, because I understand that. And so let me to rephrase it, and it's always a dangerous thing, I know, rephrasing things that you say. I've learned that from editing. That basically the people in the cancer study are motivated because they see a significant benefit, even if they only have a 50-50 chance of being in the arm that's beneficial.
Right.
So in this particular study, the individuals were given $6,000.
Right.
Well, I have a benefit right away, and I don't have to worry that I'm in the 50% that didn't get the $6,000, because I get it, even if I don't wind up subsequently infected. So how do you make it? What's the ethical distinction between my motivation for $6,000, which I may not be able to get any other way, and the cancer patient?
Very good question. So the powers that be decided that the motivation for these studies should not depend on money, because then in a sense you could be saying you're buying somebody's life. And so while you've written about your own partaking in a clinical study. As you have written, it is customarily accepted that you will pay a participant for their time, the same way you'd pay an expert witness or anybody else who's supposedly making a difference. You're not supposed to compensate or use the money as the motivator, because it can be construed as buying somebody's life. Or the next step, the slippery slope, is I'll sell you my arm, or I'll sell you my body parts. Once you introduce money in the equation in excess of what reimbursement, you have a slippery slope of buying someone's life or a body part.
Okay, so
and just interestingly, in this study, the researchers go to great lengths to say that $6,000 was just reimbursement, when it clearly was not. I mean, they say the normal salary of a person in the UK is blah, 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 and it's not. It's way, way excessive. But they are aware of the fact that monetary compensation in excess of reimbursement is verboten.
Okay, because now it sounds like we're getting into that territory where we start talking about, should we compensate kidney donors?
Exactly.
Same kind of question.
Exactly.
Okay, so I have that down. The other part that you talk a lot in the article about the risks versus benefits. So I want to wind it further back and talk to you about the Helsinki Accords. Where did they come from, and what do they really mean?
So the Helsinki Accords were created in 1964 by the World Medical Association, of which I am an auxiliary by being a member of the chair of the International Council of Bioethics, which works with the World Medical Association.
So we may blame you for this.
Pardon me?
We may blame you for this then.
Oh, well, they basically, in 1964, they took the Nuremberg Accord, which was prompted by the Nazi experiments, and put a kibosh on human experimentation, or restrained it, and they further particularized it. It has been, since 1964, I have it in front of me, amended 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. 10 times. This Helsinki Accord is uniformly adopted as the paradigm according to which protocols will be followed internationally. Now, in the UK has its own experimentation protocol called the Nuffield protocol. The US has its own by the FDA and the Federal Register, but the principles enunciated by the Helsinki Declaration serve as the basis for virtually all types of accepted experimentation on human subjects. And interestingly, the general principles begin with the World Medical Association of Geneva binds the position with the words, health and well-being of my patient will be my first consideration. And when you're doing a novel treatment, you can make that argument. When you're challenging healthy people, you've got a big problem. I think you have a big problem complying with that initial lead-on.
Well, but just again, for argument's sake, if I am a public health doctor, then my patient is the population. And so I can see my way through some quick mental gymnastics around that problem, do no harm, because I'm actually serving to protect the population.
That's exactly right. And that mindset was said to be the mindset that enabled Mengele to justify his experiments. In the biography of Mengele, he said his population is the public health and his desire is to... And so it's some buried in there. The Helsinki document doesn't require but expresses an interest that the study researchers are medical doctors. And you also saw the same type of falling off the track with Andrew Wakefield, who had grandiose notions. So when the health and well-being of the individual patient is not the prime focus, you have a lot of problems.
Okay, fair enough. So that helps there. Now the other thing that, and you spent a long time, as I said, talking about risk and benefits. Now, this study was approved by an institutional review board, an IRB. Now, whether that IRB was associated with the university or not, I think is an interesting question, because what I grew up with was that the IRBs were all associated with the medical school or academic center that was doing the study. And their job was to make sure that the scientific questions were posed in a way that could be answered, that the statistics were appropriate, and that the informed consent was truly an informed consent. But there's now been a whole number of private institutional review boards. So I'm wondering whether, if your study is approved by one of those, whether there's a conflict of interest on their part, because obviously they're going to get more work the more studies they approve.
Well, having sat on institutional review boards both as a member and as an observer, even ones that are tied to a university, and the one I sat on was a major public health university, and one I observed it was a hospital. These IRB boards, who you would think might be more objective, they also stand to gain. And I saw abuses that I could not believe, and the belief is that their minutes are kept protected. So they are motivated by approving a study, because then they will be their institution will be retained to do more studies and more studies. So while they may not be pocketing the money in themselves, they are getting grants or outside finances and work. And in one case I saw they actually manipulated the informed consent to get the patients to sign on. This particular study was a drug for cancer or something, I don't remember what it was, that did yield better results. However, 50% of the study's participants died in the first week. So if you lived, and they didn't disclose that. So if you didn't disclose that, they said this study is really, really wonderful, and this drug is really wonderful, but they don't tell the patients they're going to 50% will die in the first week. So this was a major public health institution. You'd fall off your chair if I told you the name of it. That was approving a settlement, a protocol to foster more work being given to the, they want a reputation of being an easy yes. So I don't think it makes a difference outsiders or insiders. There's financial motivation that's driving everybody here.
Now you did say that they felt that their minutes were protected. So really, I can't think offhand of any legal protection that they would have. I can't think of any specific law. I mean, there medical records in general, hospital records. For the most part, can be subpoenaed. I can't think of. I understand about our safety and investigation studies, and I know that there is very little that can be done to keep those from an attorney.
Well, you don't know, not you personally, one does not know who's keeping the minutes, and they didn't change their protocol until I threatened to put it in writing.
Okay, yes, I understand that the minutes can be very vague we had a general discussion, and at the end we all were happy and left.
And only when I said, I would suggest that we do things differently here, and if not, I'm going to put it in writing where things change. So,
okay. So who then becomes the guardian? Who then becomes the guardian of the patient?
That's a really good question. And someday when I'm old and gray and I'm not worried about somebody kiboshing my career, I might write an expose on this stuff, because I don't know how many people are really aware of what goes on. Unless, of course, like you saw in the Wakefield experiments, there's terrible outcomes and you have plaintiffs' lawyers starting to forage through these things. The plaintiff's lawyers in defense do become the guardian, but there are wrongs that happen that if nobody gets hurt, nobody knows about it. Pretty much like this study. Nobody will be hurt by this cognitive benefit. The study was ostensibly done for other reasons. Nobody will be hurt. The same thing with Helolax. The Helolax is the same thing. Nobody was hurt by that. Although in both Helolax and in this cognitive study and in Wakefield, the researchers stood to gain financially, and so they pushed it. Who is the guardian? It's very hard, because especially now you can do work using these studies if the researchers' names are blinded and they're anonymized. So these cognitively challenged COVID patients in the separate secondary spin-off research, that research was done by one person who was part of the initial protocol, and then the secondary spin-off research was done by him in concert with some of his colleagues who were principals in a for-profit making corporation that marketed cognitive assessments. And was anybody harmed? No. Will they make money? Probably at some point down the line. Will anybody tie their database to this study? Not until Henry and I found this study was anybody even aware of it.
So maybe this is a more fundamental question here as we wrap up, but I get the impression from the article that you and Henry seem to think, correct me if I'm wrong, that these sorts of studies can't be done ethically. Is that the takeaway here? Or if the protocol were more clearly defined, if the rules had been followed perhaps more carefully, would this have been appropriate? Or is it just the fact that you're doing a challenge study? You're effectively making people sick and seeing what happens. That's the problem.
Well, I hope I'm not misspeaking for Henry. Henry, who has a huge track record in monitoring and watching this, I think really doesn't like challenge studies at all. In some situations, I don't think you have a choice. Like if you're testing a vaccine and there's no alternative, you don't have a choice. Where you don't have a choice, you can make an argument. In the case where in this situation, where you're trying to discern whether there are immunological changes, there are ways that you can do something, maybe not as precise, but you can do a prospective study, monitoring people, monitoring their biomarkers, their immune studies prospectively. That's much longer, it's much more expensive, but it's also much safer. When it comes to this, by the way, we're going to tack on this cognitive stuff, and we do not know what was the driver. Did these cognitive people, one of them who was a part of the original studies, come to people and say, I can't really do a cognitive study ethically, let's wrap this up in something that I can sell, like managing the immune markets? We don't know this. because I was flabbergasted when I looked at the names of the people on the secondary study to see that virtually all of them were exclusively tied to this profit-making corporation. And why was that even part of the study to begin with? So what drove which? So the answer to your question is, if there is some way to get the information more safely, whether it's more expensive and longer or not is irrelevant, unless the information needs to be done right away, like in a new vaccine, and I think you have no choice but to go that way. When you can get the information, what is the purpose of this to measure? I mean, what are they going to do? What is the purpose of even the initial study? So they know that there's a difference in the immune markers. There's too small a study to make any generalizable conclusions. Chuck, what was the number of people in the study? 36 or something?
Yeah.
34, 36. What are they going to learn from testing 34 people?
Well, you do raise an interesting question in terms of the intent there, and I think that one thing you also fall upon is the productivity of the study. It costs money to do any of these studies, and if you can piggyback on top of something else, that's good. Your safer version of the study would be far more costly, and
without question,
both costly in terms of money and time. And so it very well may be that sometimes we trade production efficiencies for our ethical values.
It would appear that this is the case, and it doesn't really get debated until, God forbid, somebody dies. Now, nobody's going to die from the cognitive study. Somebody could have died, and there was, I think, one serious instance in the immune marker study. So, yeah, and that's why we have these IRBs, supposedly, and that's why we have these protocols, the UNESCO Declaration on Bioethics, is because somebody's got to look after the ethics, which goes down the tube.
Okay, so I'm going to try this last question. This is a loaded question, but I'll put it out there anyway. Here it comes. So when the attorneys write the consents, and let's be real, we know who's really writing the consents. Are they writing them for the researchers to cover them, or are they writing them for the participants to inform them?
In theory or in practice?
Well, I'm a big fan of practice.
Well, in practice, they're trying to shield people from liability. That's the bottom line of this. This is all liability driven, and that's what people might not like to hear it, but plaintiffs' attorneys in some situations do serve a very important purpose. Now, according to these protocols, Helsinki, the UNESCO Declaration, which has a big chapter on informed consent, it's supposedly done for societal protection, but societal protection doesn't get honored unless there's a lawsuit.
It's impressive stuff. Your ability to summarize this in 20 minutes and all of the difficult issues involved here. And apparently all of the safeguards that have kind of just not worked. It's fascinating. So I'm going to encourage people to go read this article because, as you said, it hasn't really gotten the article has, but the issue broadly as a society, we haven't really paid attention to it. It doesn't seem like. So article is called "Volunteers Infected with COVID Virus and an Unethical Human Medical Experiment Goes Unnoticed." That's on acsh.org. If you want to get the stories we talk about, go to the website and click the subscribe tab, punch in your email address, and we will send these to you. You can also follow us on social media. We're at ACSH.org, and I'm at CamJ Send us your comments, questions, topic ideas for the show. Thank you so much. Thank you, Barbara, for joining us, as always.
Thank you very much for having me, and as usual, it was good chatting with you and riffing with my colleague and friend Chuck over there. Thank you for getting my brain on high gear here yet again.
Very good. We'll see everyone next time. Thank you for joining us.
Take care.